I'm going to look at the revolts in the Roman Empire. This screen capture gives an overview of the revolts that occurred in the 1st century BCE and the first part of the 1st century CE. Now, you don't need to take too much from this, except to see how frequent a revolution was, a revolt was. Throughout the 1st century BCE, there were revolts within the Republican Empire, if we can call it that, but there were also civil wars going on. So the 1st century BCE is an absolute era of chaos in ancient Rome. But if you look through the list, you can actually see revolts, such as the slave revolts, including the revolt of Spartacus, and one or two others. And into the 1st century, we start to see revolts against the empire. This list only goes up to 40. You can go to Wikipedia, you can have a look at how long the list is. So it's safe to assume from this that the people who were governed by Rome, especially in the provinces, were not always content to be governed by Rome. There were very few serious revolts. Revolts where a group of people decided they wanted to overthrow Roman government and establish independence for a region or a province. Didn't happen very often. The reason for that is because the Roman army was enormous. Rome could draw upon soldiers from all over the empire. So any attempt to overthrow Roman rule was kind of likely to be futile, likely to end in failure. However, there are occasions when Roman rule went too far, and either the behaviour of the government machinery or the military machinery of Rome led to people snapping, or alternatively overtaxation or an attempt to squeeze too much money from a region led to a revolt. I'm going to focus on two in this clip. The first one is actually, it's outside, both of these are outside the reign of Augustus, but they are revolts within the imperial era, so they can still work for exam purposes. The first one is a revolt that took place in Britannia in 60 CE. Some of you will be aware of who Boudica or Boudicca, depending on your pronunciation, is. You may have come across the rather excellent horrible history song about Boudica, which I think is actually the best horrible history song. Boudica through the prism of a Blur cover, I would argue. Anyway, what happened was Boudica was queen of the Iceni, and when her husband died, he left a will, and he explained that his lands were left to the Emperor Nero and to his daughters. The Romans ignored this will, took all of his property, flogged his wife and raped his daughters. At the time, the governor of Britannia, Paulinus, was campaigning in Anglesey, in modern-day Wales, in the west of Britannia. This is one of those moments when the behaviour of the Romans broke the camel's back, and Boudica managed to gather together soldiers from the Iceni, obviously, but also the Trinovantes and other tribes in the south of England. And they went on a bit of a rampage, and they sacked major cities, Colchester, London, St Albans, and they killed, it's estimated, 80,000 Romans. You can imagine what kind of shock that would have sent back to Rome. And indeed, Nero apparently was on the verge of withdrawing Roman occupation from Britain as a response to this massive setback. However, the reason that Boudica was able to be successful is because the Romans hadn't grouped together troops in the south of England. It was slightly disorganized, and they were able to engage reasonably unopposed. So when they killed 80,000 Romans, it's because there were not sufficient troops defending these Roman settlements. As soon as Paulinus arrives back in the south of what we'd call England now, he organises Roman troops who were actually outnumbered by the British tribes, but exterminated the revolt reasonably straightforwardly, and at the end of which Boudicca committed suicide. So again, just an example of when Roman behaviour oversteps that boundary of tolerance, and the British rose up against Roman rule. I'm amazed I've not seen more of the Boudicca story in the Brexit narrative that's going on at the moment from the right-wing press. I'm sure it will be there as we approach October 31st. Anyway, you've got me off the subject again. The second revolt has, I would argue, a deeper set of causes. It certainly goes back further. And for our purposes, we're going to start at 63 BCE when Pompey Magnus, the great Roman general, sacked the city of Jerusalem. Rome had engaged with military forces in this area for a long period before that, but Pompey Magnus was the first, I believe, to sack the city. Rome then established a relationship with Judea. Well, we can't call it Judea yet, but with the region where the kings were client kings. Essentially, they governed, but they did as they were told, according to what Rome wanted. The famous King Herod, who famously sent out the order to exterminate all the babies when he heard that a new king of the Jews had been born. I'm not even sure that's historically sound. Anyway, that's what people know King Herod for. He ruled Jerusalem as a client king of the Romans from 37 BCE to 4 BCE. He wasn't popular, he was a tyrant. And then in 6 CE, the area was demarcated, and the Roman province of Judea was created. Confusingly, the first governor of the province of Judea was also called Herod, but was not King Herod. And this transition from a kingdom to a province, and the fact that the Romans immediately set up a census in order to determine how much tax should be squeezed out of the province, provoked a revolt which was quickly extinguished, but an indication of how unpopular Roman taxation measures could be. Anyway, throughout the first century BCE, in the first half of the first century BCE, disturbances, rioting, shall we say small-scale revolt, was a reasonably common feature of the province. It was a difficult place to govern, not least during the governorship of Pontius Pilate, who very famously sentenced Jesus to be executed. I'm sure there are all sorts of historical debates about the existence of Jesus, or even about the method by which he was or was not sentenced. But that's for other people to debate. The point is, Pontius Pilate was a real governor. He really did rule until 36 CE. Because Judea was such a tricky place to govern, the Romans largely allowed the Jews to practice their monotheistic religion. Remember, the Romans were polytheistic. They believed in lots of different gods. But they made no attempt to impose their Roman faith on Judea. That's not to say that the Romans always behaved well. Caligula, for example, because he was, shall we say, colourful, He wanted a statue of himself erected in the temple in Jerusalem, which is as culturally insensitive a move as you could hope to make. That provoked rioting. The governor of the time managed to delay Caligula, and then at the end of the year he was actually persuaded to reverse the order. Again, though, the sense of Romans not judging the situation with sensitivity, leading to rioting. In 46 CE, there was a small uprising in Galilee, inspired by two brothers, and the Romans crushed that. I think it took 2 years to crush, and the brothers themselves were executed. The point is, when these revolts did occur, the Romans responded violently, as you are about to see. Which brings us to 66 CE, and according to Wikipedia, this particular revolt was provoked when some Greek merchants, immigrants into Judea, were found sacrificing birds in front of the synagogue in Caesarea. Obviously, the Greek, as part of Greek religion, sacrifice was a common part. But again, to sacrifice birds so close to a Jewish place of worship, that provoked part of the revolt. But again, that insensitivity. Gessius Florus, the governor of Judea, in the same year, he took 17 talents of gold from the temple in Jerusalem. This is a huge amount of gold, a huge amount of money. And he took it as payment for the emperor. Naturally, the citizens of Judea responded with a massive, lengthy revolt. It took 4 years for the Romans to extinguish the main revolt, but it still continued beyond that, I think as far as 73 CE. So you're looking at somewhere between 4 and 7 years for this revolt to take place. More than 100,000 Jews were either killed or made slaves. 100,000, vast number. Again, exposing the brutality. The telling blow, the spine of the revolt was broken in 70 CE when the Romans recaptured Jerusalem, and the remaining Jewish forces were eliminated. Over the coming years, I think Masada, the famous incident of Masada, where the Romans murdered the entire town, I think it's at 73 CE. If it's not 73 CE, it's close enough. And if you want the precise figure, you can look it up for yourself. Anyway, so that's 2 revolts, both brutally put down by the Romans, but also you can trace the cause of the revolt to bad Roman behaviour and bad government. There's no skinny for this one, just go back over the notes and write them up yourself, because it's quite tricky for you to determine what is relevant, what is important, and what you can actually leave to one side. As usual, though, any questions, see me in class.